Recently, I've seen a lot of people posting online a question. Can I outbid a current existing offer on a property I really love? Let's talk about that. Hi, I'm Tom Byrd with Keller Realty in Peachtree City. And today we're going to be talking about what a buyer can do if their dream home already has an offer on it. And one quick note before we get started, everything I'm discussing today pertains to the state of Georgia. If you're not in the state of Georgia, it might be a little bit different how things work for your state. And you would be advised to reach out to your realtor. And if you don't have a realtor, we would be more than happy to get you in touch with one that would be able to help you. So, can you outbid a current accepted offer that's under a binding contract? The answer really is kind of yes, kind of no. The state of Georgia has a backup agreement contingency, which allows you to go under contract with the seller in a backup role. Now, if for any reason the initial buyer is unable to purchase the home and their contract terminates, then your offer automatically becomes the primary contract and the house doesn't go back on the market. It's just as if your contract was accepted the date that one terminated. In Georgia, there are three primary reasons that a contract between a buyer and a seller terminates without the property selling. First, we have a due diligence period here, which is a negotiable amount of time that the buyer will do all of their inspections and their due diligence. And during that period, for any reason, they don't like something an inspector found, or they simply changed their mind, they can terminate the contract and get their earnest money back. Second, if the buyer's financing falls through and they're unable to purchase the home, the contract will terminate. And the third main reason why contracts do not end up selling is if the purchase is subject to an appraisal and the appraiser does not see the value in the property, then if the seller and the buyer cannot come to an agreement on a new price, the contract will terminate. So because of those three reasons, contracts do terminate from time to time. And we have been successful in getting our clients into their desired home by way of this backup agreement. So let's take a brief look at the form, how it works, and answer some of the most common questions. So this backup agreement contingency is submitted in addition to all the other documents you regularly would with an offer, including the purchase and sale, any contingencies such as your financing contingency. So let's look at it a little deeper. The first clause on the backup agreement just states that this is a backup or a secondary offer to the current one in place. And the buyer on this agreement has no right to purchase the property unless the primary contract that's already in place terminates. And then the seller gives notice to the buyer on the backup agreement that it terminated. So simply put, it means just what the backup agreement says. It's a backup. You can't buy it unless the first contract terminates. Pretty cut and dry. Now, the second and third clauses state that this agreement will automatically terminate if the primary contract sale goes through. Obviously, because then you can't buy the home. It's already sold. Then if that happens, the buyer of this contract will get their earnest money back. And the buyer also agrees that the seller can't do anything on the initial contract that will alter this backup contract. Now, I just mentioned earnest money, so it's important that we take a pause and talk about that quickly. Depending on how the earnest money is negotiated in the purchase and sale will depend on when it is paid. And it very well could be paid while this is in a backup contract state. Now, clause 4 is a question that we get a lot with backup offers. It states that the buyer of the backup offer has no right to inspect the property. They don't even have the right to be advised of any of the terms of the initial contracts or any of the updates. Now, because the seller willingly went into a backup agreement with you, chances are they're going to give you some information. However, they're not bound to give you anything. So in the backup position, you really can be sitting in the dark until it either closes or you've been told that it terminated. Now, moving on to clause 5. Here is the real meat and potatoes of the backup contingency. To translate this big paragraph, it simply states that the seller is agreeing to deliver notice to the buyer if the initial agreement is terminated. If that happens, here's what happens next. The clock on all of the time limits set forth in the purchase and sale or any of the other contingencies start at the time the notice was delivered. So for example, if you have a 5 days due diligence period on your purchase and sale, that clock of 5 days starts the day you would be notified that you became the primary contract. So your offer will also have a closing date on it. Now, if that closing date is prior to any of the contingencies or the due diligence period timeframes, closing is automatically moved back 7 days from that latest time limit. So for example, let's say we've made a backup offer with a closing date that is 2 weeks from today and we just received notice. In that offer, we have a due diligence period of 7 days and a finance contingency of 21 days. Well, this exhibit says it will go 7 days past the longest time limit. So closing would automatically be pushed back 28 days. That's 21 days of the finance contingency plus the 7 days afforded in this exhibit. All of this will allow the buyer to do their due diligence and get their financing together in order to be able to close. Now, the final clause is basically a deadline that has a date with which the backup contingency contract will automatically terminate if it hasn't become the primary contract by that date. Now, going back to the initial question concerning if you can outbid a current contract on a property. You can outbid a current contract. However, a seller can't just terminate that contract because they've got a better offer from you. But having said that, it does strengthen that seller's position in any potential negotiations with that buyer. For example, if there's appraisal issues and there's discussion on what needs to be fixed or what doesn't need to be fixed, that seller could be in a better position to say, I really don't want to make that change or that fix, or I really don't want to come off of my price because I can just simply go to this next offer. So, it can help getting the house. Well, I really hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope it shines some light on your options when you find a property that you either got outbid on initially or it's already under contract. And if you're looking to buy or sell in the Atlanta metro area, we would love to help you out. And if you're not in our area, we would be more than happy to make a great connection for you in your neck of the woods. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Do you want to know more about real estate? Be sure to watch this next video and don't forget to subscribe. That way you'll know when I drop my next video.